I have everything I need. Let me write the new story with fresh names not on that list. My mother-in-law flew in from Houston 3 days before the wedding, uninvited, and told my fiancé's entire family that I had a criminal record. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Audrey and I am 31 years old. I run a boutique medispa in downtown Atlanta that I built from the ground up after the worst 2 years of my life. But before I tell you how that dinner ended, let me take you back to where it all started. I met my ex-fiancé, Preston, at a friend's rooftop birthday party in the summer of 2017. He was charming in the way that men are charming when they want something. He laughed loudly, made everyone around him feel electric, and he had this particular way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room. I was 23, working double shifts at a luxury aesthetics clinic on Peachtree Street, saving every dollar I could toward my license and my own studio space. Preston's mother, who I will refer to simply as his mother because I refused to give her the dignity of a name in my own story, had decided from our very first handshake that I was the wrong kind of woman for her son. Not because I was a bad person, not because I was a bad person, not because I'd ever done a single thing to her, but because I had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur with a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who drove delivery trucks. I was the wrong tax bracket. That was my crime. For 3 years I tried. I brought her flowers. I learned her complicated dietary preferences. I smiled through comments about my clothing choices and my neighborhood, and the fact that my undergraduate degree was from a state school, not an Ivy. Preston would always squeeze my hand under the table and whisper later that she did not mean anything by it. He always had an excuse for her. I should have paid closer attention to what that told me about him. When Preston finally proposed, in December of 2019, his mother's response to the news was not congratulations. It was a phone call to Preston the following morning asking him if he was absolutely certain. I know this because Preston told me himself, laughing it off like it was an amusing little quirk. I did not find it amusing. I found it a warning I did not take seriously enough. The wedding was planned for October 2020. I know the world had other plans that year, but we postponed and rescheduled for April 2021. I was not just paying for my share of the event, I was quietly covering the venue deposit in full because Preston's money was, as he described it, temporarily tied up in a series of investment opportunities. I did not question it at the time. I trusted him the way you trust someone you love. Completely and recklessly and without asking to see the receipts. 3 days before the wedding, his mother arrived from Houston on a flight nobody told me she was taking. She showed up at his family's home, where his aunt and uncle and several cousins were already gathered for pre-wedding dinners, and she sat down at the kitchen table and told them that she had done some research. She said she had hired a private investigator. She said that 6 years ago, I had been arrested. She described it as a serious criminal matter and said she felt the family had a right to know before I became one of them. The arrest she was describing was real. I will not pretend it was not. When I was 23, I was in a car with a man I had been dating briefly, and that man was pulled over. There was marijuana in the car. It was not mine. The charge against me was dropped within 60 days because it was not mine, and there was zero evidence connecting me to it. My record was expunged. The legal process worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. I was never convicted. I was never even charged with anything that stuck. But his mother did not include those details in her kitchen table presentation to the family. She presented the arrest as the full story and stopped there. Preston called me that night. He did not call to comfort me or defend me. He called to ask me if it was true. I told him exactly what I just told you, the facts, the timeline, the expungement. There was a long silence on the line. He said he needed a few days to think. I said I needed him to stand up for me in his family's kitchen. He said he understood. He did not go back to that kitchen. He took a few days. And on the morning that was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of my life, I received a text message, not a phone call, a text. He said he was so sorry, but he could not go through with it. He said his family was everything to him and that this had made things too complicated. He said he hoped I understood. I sat on the floor of my bridal suite at the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Atlanta in the dress I had paid for myself. And I read that text message 4 times. I did not cry, at least not right away. What I felt first was something colder than sadness. It was clarity. absolute and surgical clarity about who these people were and what I had spent 3 years of my life trying to earn. The venue deposit was non-refundable. The florist, the caterer, the photographer. None of it came back. I lost just over $19,000 that morning. That number is not incidental to this story. Hold on to it. The 2 years that followed were the hardest of my life in a way that I do not think I can fully describe in a few sentences. I grieved the relationship, the future I had planned, and the version of myself that believed working hard enough and being kind enough could overcome someone else's prejudice. I went back to work. I worked with a ferocity that probably looked from the outside like ambition but felt from the inside like survival. I took every certification available in my field. I studied cosmetic laser technology, dermal procedures, aesthetic nursing protocols. I started networking with physicians who were willing to bring on a skilled esthetician as a clinical partner. I found one, a semi-retired dermatologist named Dr. Osi, who had a small practice in Buckhead and wanted someone energetic and driven to help him grow the patient base. We structured a revenue-sharing agreement. I was 25 years old and I was treating patients in a real clinical space for the first time. Within 18 months, I had saved enough to lease my own suite. I named it Luminary Aesthetics. The name was deliberate. Light in the dark. I furnished it piece by piece, buying the treatment bed before I bought the laser equipment, buying the laser equipment before I replaced my own secondhand sofa at home. I did not spend money on things that would not build the business. Every dollar that came in was a brick in the foundation of something I was constructing entirely on my own. By the time I was 29, Luminary Aesthetics had a 4-month waitlist. We had expanded to a 3-room suite in a renovated medical building on Piedmont Avenue. I had 2 licensed estheticians on my team and a part-time office manager. My revenue had crossed the 7-figure mark for the first time. I hired a financial advisor, a real estate attorney, and I started doing what she advised, turning income into assets. I bought the condominium I had been renting. I purchased a small commercial property in the West Midtown Arts District and leased it to a yoga studio. When the medical building I operated from put a suite on the market, I bought it outright. When the building ownership itself was restructured and the existing managing partner wanted to exit quietly, I made an offer. My attorney handled the transaction. It closed in early 2023. I was 30 years old and I owned the building I worked in. I am telling you all of this, not to impress you, but because you need to understand the architecture of what happened on the night I am about to describe. It was a Thursday evening in February, 7 months ago. I was finishing up a late client appointment at Luminary, reviewing the intake notes for a new patient scheduled for a laser resurfacing consultation. My office manager, Yolanda, knocked on my treatment room door and told me there were 4 people at the front desk without an appointment. She said one of them was being loud. She said one of them claimed to be family. I took off my gloves and walked out to the reception area. My spa had a warm, minimal design, cream walls, soft recessed lighting, the faint scent of eucalyptus and warm amber in the diffuser near the entrance. It was intentionally calm. It was the opposite of everything I was looking at when I pushed open the glass door to the waiting room. Preston was standing at the front desk. He was 34 now, and the years had not been particularly kind to him in the way that they are not kind to men who coast. He was wearing a sport coat that had fit him better at a different body weight, and he had the particular restless energy of someone who had driven a long way on not enough sleep. Behind him stood his mother, wearing the same expensive-looking armor she always wore. Rigid posture, a silk blouse, a look on her face like the room smelled faintly wrong. Behind her were his younger sister, who I had met a handful of times during the engagement, and beside her, a man I did not recognize who I would later learn was her husband. I stood in the doorway and looked at them. None of them had made an appointment. None of them had called ahead. None of them had spoken to me in nearly 5 years. Preston saw me and immediately shifted into a version of himself I recognized from the old days, the charming version, the rooftop, birthday party version. He smiled with his whole face and stepped toward me with his hands slightly open at his sides, the body language of someone performing harmlessness. "Audrey," he said. "I know this is a surprise. I know we should have called." "You should have called," I confirmed. I kept my voice even and I did not move from the doorway. His mother stepped forward before he could continue. She had always operated this way, letting him begin the soft approach and then walking straight through it when she felt the situation required a harder hand. "This will not take long," she said. Her voice carried that particular flatness of a woman who had decided in advance that this conversation was a formality rather than a negotiation. "We have driven 4 hours to talk to you in person because what we need to discuss is a family matter, and it deserves to be handled face to face." I looked at her for a moment. "You are not my family," I said. "You made that decision in April of 2021. What can I help you with?" The color in her neck shifted slightly. She was not accustomed to being received this way. During the 3 years of the engagement, I had trained myself to be patient with her. Accommodating, perpetually soft-edged. She had built her entire model of how to handle me on that behavior. I was not that person anymore. Preston jumped back in. He explained that he and his sister had launched a business together the previous year, a wellness concept he called it, a health and recovery spa targeting professional athletes and high-income clients. They had invested significantly in the build-out of a location in Buckhead. They had signed a long-term commercial lease. The business, he said, had not performed the way they projected. They were currently behind on their lease payments. The landlord had sent formal notices. They were facing the possibility of being locked out of the space. They needed capital to bridge a gap. He used that word specifically, bridge, and they needed it quickly. I listened to all of this without interrupting. I watched his sister's husband shift his weight from foot to foot near the back of the room. I watched his mother hold herself very still, which was the posture she adopted when she was monitoring a situation closely. "What does any of that have to do with me?" I asked, when Preston finished. He said my name in a tone that was supposed to feel intimate. He said that he knew things had ended badly between us, and that he knew his family had not handled it well, and that he had thought about reaching out for a long time. He said he had heard, through mutual connections, that my business was doing well. He said he was not asking for a handout. He was proposing a business arrangement. He wanted to discuss the possibility of a partnership, a formal investment with returns structured properly. He said his sister's concept was sound and the location was excellent, and all they needed was someone with liquidity to stabilize the operation while they rebuilt momentum. I looked at his mother then because I wanted to see what her face was doing. She was watching me with an expression that was carefully neutral but slightly tilted toward expectation. The expression of someone who believes the answer is already yes and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "How much?" I asked. Preston said $80,000. Yolanda, who had positioned herself discreetly near the supply cabinet at the far side of the room, made a very small sound that she quickly covered with a cough. $80,000. Nearly the same amount I had lost in non-refundable deposits and vendor payments on the morning his mother finished dismantling my engagement from a kitchen in Houston. I nodded slowly, as though I were genuinely considering the number. "Come to the back," I said. "We can talk in the consultation room." The consultation room at Luminary was designed for client conversations. 2 chairs, a small table, a tablet mounted on the wall for displaying treatment visuals. It was comfortable and private. I led them back and gestured for them to sit. His mother took the chair closest to the door, which was the power position, which was typical. Preston sat across from me. His sister and her husband stood near the wall, slightly behind the seated group, functioning as backup. I pulled the tablet off its mount and set it on the table facing them, screen dark. Then I folded my hands in my lap and asked Preston to walk me through the business plan. I asked him to give me the full picture. The lease terms, the revenue projections, the current arrears, the total debt load. This was the first moment I saw his confidence develop a crack. He had expected the conversation to stay emotional. He had expected me to respond to the history between us, to feel the pull of what we had once been to each other, to perhaps make a decision from that soft place. He had not prepared for a clinical review of his financial documents, because he did not have the financial documents with him. He explained things in general terms. The build-out had cost more than anticipated. Their initial client base was slower to materialize than projected. They had a strong concept, but the market was crowded and they had underestimated the marketing investment required to differentiate. I asked him what their monthly lease obligation was. He gave me a number. I asked him how many months in arrears they were. He told me 3. I asked him whether the landlord had filed a formal eviction action or whether the notices were still in the pre-litigation stage. He said he believed it was still pre-litigation but was not certain. His mother could not help herself. She had been quiet for longer than was comfortable for her, and she broke her silence with a tone she reserved for moments when she felt someone was being unreasonable. "Audrey," she said, "I understand you have questions, of course you do, but at some point this becomes about whether you are willing to help, or whether you are not. Preston needs an answer. The situation is time-sensitive." I looked at her. "I know the situation is time-sensitive," I said. "That is why I want accurate information before I make any financial decision. That is how I have always operated. It is part of why the business you are asking to borrow from exists." She did not care for that. The slight tightening around her eyes told me so. I turned back to Preston. I asked him who their landlord was. What entity held their commercial lease? He told me the name of the management company. He said it was called Stonegate Property Group. I picked up the tablet from the table. I turned it face up and opened the document folder I had pulled up before I walked into the reception area, in the 3 minutes between Yolanda's knock and my appearance at the waiting room door. I turned the screen toward him. "Stonegate Property Group is a trade name," I said. "The registered legal entity behind it is a holding company that was restructured 14 months ago. Would you like to know who the managing partner of that holding company is?" Preston stared at the screen. He had not been expecting the question to be rhetorical. He shook his head very slightly, the way a person does when something is moving faster than they can track. "It is me," I said. "My attorney restructured the acquisition under a separate LLC from Luminary to keep the portfolios clean. But I own the company that holds your lease. I have owned it since February of last year, which means I have been your landlord for the past 14 months without either of us knowing we were about to have this conversation." The room went very quiet. The eucalyptus diffuser was still running in the hallway. I could hear it faintly through the wall. His sister made a sound, not a word. Just a quick, involuntary exhale, like someone who had just been told the test came back positive for something. Preston sat perfectly still, looking at the tablet screen. I watched him read the document header twice. I watched his brain try to reconcile what he was seeing with the version of this conversation he had been playing out in his head on the 4-hour drive from Houston. "You're our landlord," he said. It was not a question. It was someone reading a sentence back aloud to confirm the words were actually there. "I am," I said. "Which means the $80,000 you drove here to ask me to invest in your struggling business is $80,000 you are already asking me to absorb in a different form, because what you actually need is for your landlord to forgive 3 months of arrears and restructure your lease terms. You are not pitching me an investment opportunity. You are asking your landlord for a bailout. And you did not know that I was your landlord when you walked in here tonight." Preston's mother stood up. The movement was abrupt and physical in a way that was meant to fill space, the way powerful people move when a conversation starts going somewhere they did not plan. "This is absurd," she said. "You are telling us that you own the building where my children's business is located, and you have known this while they have been sending you lease payments." "My property management company has been receiving your lease payments," I said, keeping my voice completely steady. "Until 3 months ago, those payments came in on time. My management team sent the standard notices when the payments stopped, which is standard practice. I had no reason to connect the delinquent account to Preston specifically, because your lease is registered under your business entity, not under his name. I made the connection approximately 40 minutes ago, when Yolanda described the group at the front desk." She stared at me for a long moment. I had seen that stare before. It was the stare she used when she was deciding which angle to take. "Then you can fix this," she said. Her voice had changed, not softer exactly but more direct. The performance of civility was gone, and what was underneath it was transactional and cold. "You are a businesswoman. You own the building. You can forgive the arrears. You can adjust the lease. You have the power to solve this problem tonight and choose not to make an issue of it. Preston made a mistake 6 years ago. He knows that. You have clearly done extraordinarily well for yourself. You have nothing to lose by being generous." Preston looked up from the tablet screen. He nodded slightly in agreement with his mother. The charming man from the rooftop had fully receded. What was left was someone who had driven 4 hours hoping to use an old emotional debt as currency, and who had just discovered the exchange rate was not what he assumed. She is right, he said quietly. You have everything. We have nothing right now. Doesn't that give you some kind of obligation? I let the word land. Obligation. I turned it over for a moment. Let me ask you something, Preston, I said. The morning of April 14th, 2021, do you remember what I asked you to do? He said nothing. I asked you to go back to your family's kitchen and tell them the truth about my record, I said. I asked you to stand up for me. You said you understood. You did not do it. You sent me a text message from the bridal suite I had paid for myself, and you canceled the wedding. And in the 7 months between that day and the day my first commercial lease was signed, I lost $19,000 in non-refundable deposits, and I rebuilt everything I had from scratch. I paused. You are asking me whether I have an obligation to you. I am asking you to tell me what you think your obligation was to me. The silence was different this time. Heavier. His mother opened her mouth. I held up one hand, just slightly, and she stopped. It surprised her enough that she sat back down. I am not going to forgive the arrears, I said. I am not going to forgive the arrears, I said. I am not going to restructure the lease out of personal history. I am a property owner and you are a delinquent commercial tenant, and that relationship will be handled through the standard process that applies to all of my tenants. My management team will send the formal demand letter by end of business tomorrow. You will have 30 days to cure the default. If you cannot cure it, the eviction process will begin. Preston's sister's husband finally spoke. He had been quiet against the wall for the entire conversation, radiating the helpless energy of a man who understood he was in someone else's story. He said they had sunk their savings into the build-out. He said they had a 2-year-old daughter. He said surely there was some way to work this out, given everything. I looked at him. He was the only person in the room who had never done anything to me. I made a note of that. I am going to give you a referral, I said. There is a commercial real estate mediation firm downtown that specializes in restructuring small business leases. They are excellent, and their initial consultation is free. I will text you their contact information before you leave tonight. If you engage them and they reach out to my management company on your behalf, I will agree to mediation before any eviction filing. That is a genuine offer, not a courtesy. I slid a business card across the table, not mine, but the mediator's, which I happened to have in the tablet case because I had referred other tenants to them before. His sister's husband picked it up and looked at it carefully, then placed it in his jacket pocket. His mother stood again. She was holding her composure, but only barely. The thing about women like her is that they have spent their lives winning through a combination of social intimidation and other people's desire to keep the peace. They are not prepared for someone who simply does not want peace with them. You are doing this on purpose, she said. You are using what you know about this situation to punish my son. I am applying the same standard to your son's lease that I apply to every tenant in my portfolio, I said. If applying the same standard to him as to everyone else feels like punishment, that tells you something about what he was expecting. He was expecting basic human decency from someone he loved. He was expecting me to absorb a financial loss out of sentiment for a relationship he ended by text message, I said. Those are different things. She had no answer for that. I watched her search for one and not find it. Preston had gone very still. He was looking at his hands, which were folded on the table in front of him. He looked like someone who had finally stopped performing and was simply sitting inside the reality of what the last several years of his decisions had built. I am sorry, he said. His voice was quiet and it did not have the particular texture of performance. It sounded like something he meant, or was close to meaning. I should have defended you, I know that. I looked at him for a moment. I know you do, I said. But an apology now doesn't change what I lost then, and it doesn't change what I owe you commercially. They are separate accounts. I stood up. I picked up the tablet and tucked it under my arm. I have a full schedule tomorrow starting at 8, I said. Yolanda will see you out. If you use that referral and mediation leads to a workable restructuring plan, I will consider it on its merits. But you need to leave my building tonight. His mother looked at me one final time. I had expected to find something in her expression, contempt or anger, or at least the particular kind of dismissal she had used on me for years. What I found instead was something closer to recognition, not respect, exactly, but the acknowledgement that the person standing across from her was not the person she had flown in to manage. She picked up her bag and walked out of the consultation room without another word. Preston stood. He hesitated at the doorway, his hand resting on the frame. "The woman I knew," he started, and then stopped himself. He shook his head slightly. "Never mind. Take care of yourself, Audrey." "I always have," I said. Yolanda showed them out. I stood in the consultation room and listened to the front glass door close, and then I stood there for another minute in the quiet. I did not feel triumphant in the way you might imagine. I did not feel the rush of the scene from a movie where the wronged woman has the last word, and the music swells. What I felt was quieter than that, and more permanent. I felt like someone who had finished carrying something very heavy for a very long distance and had finally been permitted to set it down. I thought about the morning in the hotel room. I thought about the text message and the dress and the $19,000. I thought about the years that followed, the ones that had been genuinely brutal, when I was rebuilding not just my finances, but my sense of what I was worth and who I was allowed to be in the world. Those years had done something to me that I would not undo even if I could. They had made me exact. They had made me careful with my trust and precise with my energy, and they had made me the kind of woman who walks out to her reception area when 4 unannounced visitors arrive and has already pulled the relevant documents before she opens the door. 2 weeks later, Preston's sister contacted my management company and initiated the mediation process. I kept my word. I agreed to a 12-month lease restructuring at a reduced monthly rate, with the arrears rolled into the back end of the agreement. I attached one condition. As part of the mediated agreement, they were required to acknowledge in writing that the standard lease terms applied and that no personal relationship with the property owner had been factored into any financial decision. I needed that on paper, not for leverage, for my own clarity. The morning after the mediation agreement was signed, I sat at my desk at Luminary before my first client arrived, and I drank my coffee, and I looked out the window at Piedmont Avenue. The street was starting to fill with the early commuters, people heading somewhere with the particular focused energy of a Tuesday morning. I thought about Preston's mother's question, whether having everything gave me some kind of obligation. I had been turning it over since she said it. Here's what I believe. Having built something does not create an obligation to hand it to the people who refused to believe you could build it. Surviving something hard does not mean you owe comfort to the people who made it hard. You are allowed to be generous. Generosity is one of the most powerful things a person can practice. But generosity chosen freely from a position of security is completely different from generosity extracted through guilt or manufactured obligation. One builds something, the other just perpetuates the same old transaction, the one where you pay and they take and everyone pretends that is what family means. I was 23 when I was sitting in a car that got pulled over, and 23 when I started building the business, and 25 when I got the first suite, and 30 when I signed the purchase agreement on the building. Every single one of those years, I was the same person Preston's mother dismissed from a kitchen table in Houston. She decided who I was before she ever gave me a real chance to show her. That decision was hers, and she is still living inside it. I am living somewhere else entirely. If you have spent years trying to earn the approval of people who had already decided you are not enough, I want you to hear this clearly. Stop. Not because you are not worth the effort, but because you are worth so much more than that particular exchange. Stop auditing yourself against their expectations. Go build the thing. Buy the building. Become the landlord. And when they show up uninvited 4 years later needing something you have, handle it like a professional, extend the courtesy you are able to extend, and send them home. Your success was never going to be the apology they deserved. But it is a pretty extraordinary thing to have built anyway. There is something nobody tells you about the moment your life falls apart, that it has a sound. For me, it was the notification chime of a text message on a Saturday morning in April, in a hotel room I had paid for myself, in a dress I had chosen alone. That sound was the beginning of everything. I spent a long time being angry about what Preston's mother did. I spent even longer being angry at Preston for letting her do it. But somewhere in year 3 of building Luminary from a single treatment suite on Piedmont Avenue, I stopped being angry and started being grateful. not for the pain, but for what the pain forced me to become. When you have nothing left to lose and no one left to perform for, you find out very quickly what you are actually made of. I found out I was made of something I had not fully understood before. I was made of the kind of stubbornness that does not look like stubbornness from the outside. It looks like showing up. It looks like studying commercial real estate law at 11 o'clock at night after a 10-hour shift. It looks like signing a lease agreement on a suite you can barely afford and deciding that you will figure out the rest later because the alternative, staying small to stay safe, is not something you are willing to choose. What happened when Preston walked into my spa that Thursday evening was not a coincidence, and it was not luck. It was the direct result of a decade of choices, each one made quietly, without an audience, without anyone telling me I was doing the right thing. The money I lost, non-refundable deposits in 2021, became the exact number I referenced in my own mind every time I was tempted to make a financial decision out of sentiment instead of strategy. $19,000 is a painful but precise teacher. I did not forget the lesson. I want to be honest about something though. When I handed Preston's sister the mediator's card, it was not magnanimity. It was not me being the bigger person in the way that phrase usually gets used, as though being ethical is a kind of moral performance. It was me recognizing that his sister's husband had done nothing wrong, that their 2-year-old daughter had done nothing wrong, and that punishing innocent people to feel powerful over guilty ones is exactly the kind of behavior that had been used against me. I refused to become a version of Preston's mother. That refusal was not generosity, it was integrity, which is a different thing entirely. The 3 qualities that carried me from that hotel room floor to the ownership of that building were not complicated. They were just consistent. I tried to be honest about what I knew and what I did not know. I tried to make decisions based on what was actually true rather than what I wished were true. And I kept going on the days, and there were many, when keeping going felt genuinely pointless. That is the whole of it. There is no secret architecture. There is only the decision, made over and over, to keep building something real, instead of defending something false. Preston said, before he walked out of my consultation room, that I was not the woman he knew. He meant it as an observation. I received it as the finest compliment he had ever given me. The woman he knew was trying to earn a place at a table that was never going to welcome her. The woman standing in that room owned the building the table was sitting in. I am glad she is the one I became. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if you are in the part of the story that feels like nothing is working and the people who were supposed to love you have chosen something else, I want you to know that the middle is not the end. What they took from you is not the measure of what you are capable of building. The most powerful thing you can do right now is make one small, honest, intelligent decision and then make another one tomorrow. That is how the building gets built, one brick at a time, in the quiet, when nobody is watching.